No, no, it's not personal. We just have to have your legs broken. Yeah, the boys will be around later. Well, you knew the score when you borrowed the money. Doesn't matter. We're going to have them broken. Both of them. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Love you too, Mum. A lot of people ask me what the most important literary and movie genre is.
What people?
What?
What people ask you that? Who even cares what you think?
Anyway, the most important literary genre is science fiction. It's been called the genre of ideas. This is why.
I used to be a talking car in the 80s. Some guy who smelled like weed and stale urine used to sit inside me and solved crimes and brought people to justice and all that crap. He got all the chicks and the money and the fame, but I was the real talent behind the show. After it all ended, he went on to some stupid thing about girls in bikinis and then home videos of himself drunkenly eating hamburgers, while I struggled to find work. Nobody wants a car from a 1980s sci-fi that looked out of date 2 weeks after it left the showroom floor. Eventually I got work as an Uber. That's when I started abusing brake fluid. I do 3 bottles a day now, 4 if someone mentions Knight Rider. Tough times.
Nobody knows precisely when science fiction first entered the human consciousness, although the origins of ice cream are quite well documented. It is widely believed by people with nothing better to do, that the earliest roots of the genre can be found in the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, written around 4,000 years ago. Those same people ignore the Sumerian tablets that describe the ancient origins of humanity. Luckily, modern filmmakers don't. Some people claim that it wouldn't have been possible to define science fiction without an understanding of the scientific method itself, and it can, therefore, not have existed before the scientific revolution of the 17th century. Still others claim that writing itself can't have been possible without the existence of Starbucks. But those kinds of debates are better left to the intellectual equivalent of people arguing on Twitter, while the rest of us get on with more interesting things, such as wondering what would happen if you shaved a cat. The Epic of Gilgamesh is a poem from the ancient Mesopotamian people, regarded as the oldest surviving literary source of the kind of ideas that qualify as science fiction. It begins with a series of poems about the king of Uruk. The first half of the story whines on about this guy, Gilgamesh, and how he wants to live forever. The god Enki wouldn't allow it, and so some guy builds an ark to save all life on Earth from a flood, or something. To describe it as science fiction requires some fairly impressive mental gymnastics, and most people with the capacity to think, believe that it's better categorized as fantasy. Or religion. In any case, it's all probably aliens. Ancient Indian poetry, such as the story Ramayana, contains flying machines that are able to travel into space and underwater and are armed with the sort of weapons that could destroy humanity, presumably an early form of social media. The early Japanese tale of Urashima Taro involved traveling forwards in time to a far distant future world where the human race has been enslaved by anime girls printed on sentient pillows. If you go far enough back, you could find examples of this in many stories, from countless cultures.
Without science fiction, where would we be? I'd be taken out of my own movie altogether, and then it would just be a romance between a waitress and a homeless guy. Would anyone want to see that movie? Of course not. Sci-fi lets us take ordinary boring stories and add tons of hilarious murders. It's a bit like American politics.
Science fiction is by far my favourite of the literary genres. I grew up with it, and it changed the way I think about entertainment. It's what inspired me to become a writer. Now, some of my favourite books, some of the ones that have inspired me and have inspired the world, in order of date, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Now, there are many fantastic sci-fi books that came out before this, but this was, for me, the beginning of an era where writers were warning people about their ideas of the future. They could see the way society was changing, and they could see what leadership was trying to do to the world. Brave New World came up with the idea of a future where human beings were given so much nonsense, so much rubbish to deal with that they didn't care about reality anymore. And this is all around us today. This is where we have TikTok videos and YouTube and Twitter constantly feeding us this nonsensical garbage, combined with a media service that is completely irresponsible. And they're driving humanity towards idiocy. We've got this systematic dumbing down of people while we've got this ramping up of absolute nonsense. Now, while this was a science fiction idea in 1932 when the book came out, now it's just the world around us.
We're just stupid.
Later on in 1949, George Orwell wrote the best-selling science fiction novel of all time, 1984. Now, this is set in a dystopian future where those in control have completely taken over. They own everything. They're constantly watching. You're controlled by the thought police. You're not allowed to say certain things. You're not even allowed to think certain things. The population is completely under control and in a perpetual state of ideological warfare. And people don't even know who the enemy is anymore. We're just told they're the enemy. They're against us for whatever reason, and the information keeps changing, but people don't understand that anymore because they're so used to blindly following the leaders. It follows a single man as he tries to just have a life in this dystopian world where a normal life is impossible. And it's a brilliant book and a warning of the future, and again, sadly, most of it has come true today.
It's all fake news!
Fake news!
I, Robot was written between 1940 and 1950. Now, this was by Isaac Asimov, a scientist and fictional writer who wrote literally thousands of pieces of work over his lifetime. Now, I say it was written between 1940 and 1950 because I, Robot is a collection of short stories. Now, if you read it, you can see how his career progressed. He came up with the 3 laws of robotics, and the book begins with Susan Calvin, a scientist whose job it's been to help robots with their psychology to evolve and develop and to improve themselves. She's now looking back over her career while she's being interviewed about her life, telling the stories that she remembers. And the robots begin with these very simple, crude, positronic brains, and they're hardwired with the 3 laws of robotics. A robot must always protect a human being and never allow a human being to come to harm. That's rule 1. They cannot override that rule. The second rule is that they have to obey all rules that are given to them by humans, and the third is that they must protect themselves. But each rule is less important than the one before it. So you can never order a robot to hurt anybody else because the first rule will always take precedence over the rules from the second. Now, this might seem like a good idea in describing robots, but really it's using that as a metaphor for human consciousness and our own psychology. He was trying to understand how people think by using these instead of our instincts for preservation and survival. And it's a brilliant book about humanity, where we are, where we fit into the universe, and how the world is going to change when we start building sophisticated machines that look like us but are much, much smarter.
Are you crazy?
For me, this story changed the way I looked at robotics, looked at people, and looked at the future. In 1953, Ray Bradbury wrote Fahrenheit 451.
And soon you may ban books and newspapers.
Now, this is, again, a dystopian story, in as much as the world it's set in is pretty grim. People don't read anymore, but buildings have advanced. They no longer catch fire. So the fireman's job is to go around burning down books. Books have been banned, not by the government who wanted to get people dumber, but it was a slow process where people were offended by intelligence, and they slowly arranged for books to be removed. The world they live in, books are banned. Our main character is a fireman whose job it is to destroy them. And he tries reading a few books and he starts to wake up to how the world has let him, his wife, and everybody around him down. Again, it's a great book that shows a warning of the systematic dumbing down of society by those in control. In 1979, Douglas Adams brought out Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Now, originally this was a radio play based on a series of short ideas about how the world would end, set to a comedy. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is based on the idea of the world being destroyed to make way for a hyperspace express lane. But again, it's a warning about what's coming. All the way through, the message is the world is not what you think it is. So while our main character is off in this unbelievable galaxy that he never thought possible, really it's about us going into a completely different world and seeing the world that we lived in the way it really is for once. So again, it was kind of a warning about the way that the politicians and the bankers have this horrendous level of control over society, and it's completely disproportionate. So these kind of books, they warned about what was coming. They were intelligent, well written, sometimes very funny. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a comedy, but they were intellectually smart books that were designed to give us an insight into the way the world is changing. It changes everything. Movies don't work that way.
Science fiction is important. It's probably the most important of all literary genres. Because of science fiction, I get to use my spooky force powers to choke the life out of people. Choking used to just be for Hollywood actors who like to do weird things in bed, but now it's for evil villains too. That's a great example of how sci-fi is the most progressive of all the genres.
Some of the most influential movies I've seen begin with Metropolis in 1927. Now this is a black and white film with no sound, music is played over the top, and speech cards are sometimes put up to give you an idea of the dialogue. Now this follows a woman, Maria, turned into a robot, and it discusses the idea of how humanity, the working people, are enslaved by the very rich. It's a difficult film to get through because it is quite long, and without any sound, it's just difficult for us to go back to that kind of movie and to get through it. Surprisingly though, that falls away pretty quickly and the movie's actually quite watchable. It is incredibly dated now, of course, and you do have to watch it with an open mind, but it is worth watching. The Day the Earth Stood Still came out in 1951. This was again a black and white movie, but this time we had full sound. This shows a UFO landing on Earth. A man gets out, Klaatu, with his robot Galt, and eventually tells humanity that humanity is in trouble. Now that we've developed nuclear weapons and we have the ability to wage war that will get into space, now we have to behave ourselves. The alien races in the galaxy were happy to ignore us while we were no threat to anybody else. But now we're proving to be a threat to other people, and they're telling us now that we have to behave.
The universe grows smaller every day, and the threat of aggression by any group, anywhere, can no longer be tolerated. There must be security for all, or no one is secure. Now, this does not mean giving up any freedom, except the freedom to act irresponsibly. Your ancestors knew this when they made laws to govern themselves and hired policemen to enforce them.
To prove their power, all power is cut off around Earth to give us a warning that they have the ability to completely annihilate us. So it's a good story about ourselves, about the damage that we're doing by waging war against one another. Again, it's a warning of the future. Forbidden Planet came out in 1956. Now this was a fairly simplistic story of a monster loose on an alien world. Where the, I guess you'd call them police, arrive in a spaceship to try and fix the problem.
When do we get a DC fix, Jerry?
Half a minute, Skipper. Ship on course, sir. We'll reach DC point at 17:01. That's less than 3 minutes now.
All right, take it away.
It's an exploration of humanity. The monster is a reflection of the id, the inner dimensions of the human psyche, but given form. And it's an exploration of who we are really and what it means to be human. Quite an advanced idea for the time, but this is how movies used to be. They used to explore philosophical concepts. Planet of the Apes. This was the first movie that ever gave me nightmares in 1968. It's three astronauts landing on an alien world. They've taken off from Earth. Something's gone wrong, and they've crashed on this unhospitable alien planet. Most of them are dead, only a few survived. And they find out that the planet is run by apes, and humans are this downtrodden underclass who don't even have the capacity for speech. Ultimately, only one astronaut survives, and he goes off to find a life for himself in the wasteland where humans or apes are simply not allowed to go. And he makes the final discovery that he's actually back on Earth after we've committed nuclear genocide and wiped out the most of the human race.
Oh my God. I'm back. I'm home. All the time. We finally really did it. You maniacs! You blew it up! Oh, damn you! God damn you all to hell!
There's a brilliant story, again, about what the dangers of what we're doing are and what it ultimately could be. Soylent Green came out in 1973. Another film that's made a huge contribution to popular culture. It's set around now, around the years that we're living now, where the human race has become so populous that we are everywhere and there simply aren't enough resources. It follows the life of a policeman trying to maintain order in a population that's just uncontrollable. The only foodstuff is Soylent Green, and a horrible discovery has been made. And as he investigates, the ultimate discovery is that Soylent Green is humans, and we're having to grind up people and feed them back to ourselves.
They're making our food out of people. Next thing, they'll be breeding us like cattle for food. You gotta tell them. You gotta tell them.
Promise, Tiger. I promise. I'll tell the exchange.
You tell everybody. Listen to me, Hatcher. You gotta tell them. Silent Green is people! We gotta stop them somehow!
Star Wars came out in 1977, and this changed everything. Star Wars by George Lucas in 1977 changed everything about science fiction. It's true to say that this was a double-edged sword. It was fantastic in the way that it inspired an entire generation to start looking into science fiction, but it was also a huge negative. It was the first blockbuster movie. It was the first summer spectacular that was entirely based on special effects and the sheer scope of the cinematic form. It gave us spaceships, it gave us new worlds, robots, in a way that we'd never seen them before. They were realistic. We could actually believe that this was happening around us. When we saw Star Wars back in 1977, it was like visiting a literal galaxy far, far away. It was beyond anything that we'd seen before. It changed the world. George Lucas was a very, very talented filmmaker, in as much as he surrounded himself with gifted young people, fresh from university with new ideas. They invented all these new special effects, sound systems, and all the other things that are associated with modern cinema, and he took credit for them all. The second in the trilogy wasn't even filmed by himself. He had enough sense to back away and let better filmmakers get on with doing their job, while he stayed in the position of producer and overall creator. And that's what he does. He's a visionary director, but he doesn't have the technical skills to carry these kind of movies, even though he created them. But Star Wars changed the world because it made obscene amounts of money. Every single person wanted to make a movie that rips off Lord of the Rings in space. And we were suddenly inundated with these terrible movies. And because the quality of the movies went down, so did science fiction in general. Suddenly people wanted to consume more of it. And when you consume more of it, obviously you're having to produce it quickly and to a lower standard. So the movies that came after 1977 are accordingly of a lower standard, with generally a higher spectacle. 1979, Alien came out by Ridley Scott. Now this is a very strange movie in as much as the cinematography and the quality of the film far, far supersedes Star Wars. But it doesn't have the spectacle. It's a relatively low budget movie set on a single spaceship with a crew of less than a dozen people. It's a very small cast, it's a very tight story, and it's a very simple story about a group of miners discovering an alien vessel on a faraway planet, and they are infected by an alien creature. Now it's a horror story, but it's got a lot of very interesting ideas wrapped up inside it. Star Trek made a bit of a comeback. Now this used to be a television series back in the 60s, and it was quality science fiction for the time. It was based on the idea of a wagon train to the stars, where we would take the old Western idea of these frontiersmen entering a completely new world and going out and making a civilization out of it, colonizing worlds as they went.
To Captain Kirk.
Kirk here.
I have a communication from Starfleet Command, sir.
Yes, read it.
Starfleet Command extends greetings to Commissioner Beale of the planet Charon. His urgent request to be transported to his planet with the man he claims prisoner has been taken under consideration. It is with great regret that we cannot honor that request. Intergalactic treaty clearly specifies that no being can be extradited without due process.
And this was brought to the screen in Star Trek. Star Trek was meant to come back as a second TV show, but because of the success of Star Wars, it pivoted and became a series of movies. Now, the movies themselves weren't as entertaining as Star Wars, but they were far more intelligent. They were proper science fiction stories that really did ask, what if?
Without science fiction, I wouldn't be flying around in space, supporting my gallant crew. There wouldn't be any adventures with aliens who all look the same except for their foreheads. I'd probably be an artificial intelligence system installed in a Japanese toilet. It just doesn't bear thinking about.
The first one, an alien creature of unbelievable power is coming to Earth, and it explores the idea of the consequences of our actions, even our benign actions. What would they be once our actions return to us? Terminator came out in 1984. This was again a benchmark movie for me. Again, fairly low budget, follows the idea of a young girl meeting a potentially crazy guy who tells her a story about robots coming back from the future to kill her unborn son. Should she believe him? Is this possible? Is it true? She finds out over the course of the movie, and ultimately it's a time travel story about a self-fulfilling prophecy or a paradox. Very well written movie, very tight, but it spawned a series of sequels, video games, spin-off TV shows, and each one was accordingly weaker. Most people would say that Terminator 2 was the better action movie. It is a good action film, and it builds on the first one very, very well. It's lucky in that it follows the same director, and it has the same writing team, it has the same themes, but it isn't as good a movie. The first one is absolutely excellent. The second one only builds on it and only gets away with it by retconning out some of the story, changing some of the details of the first film.
Look, it may take a while. You want to wait? There's a bench over there.
I'll be back.
I didn't think it was as strong a movie. Most people disagree. The third film had a nice twist in the end, but was massively inferior to the first two. And then, unfortunately, they really do unravel as we go along. The last one that came out was so bad that it's probably killed the franchise. And frankly, that's probably a good thing. RoboCop came out in 1987. Again, a fairly smart movie based on the idea of comic book superheroes and villains, where a man is injured in the line of duty and is given a robotic body and turned into a super cop. It was an original idea at the time, and it was a commentary about corporatism, about how everything is built on a profit motive, and how nothing that we have has value unless it has a dollar value. And from that perspective, it was very well written.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
I know you. You're dead. We killed you. We killed you. We killed you.
They Live by John Carpenter came out in 1988. This was an extremely low-budget movie, and a very simple concept of a struggling, semi-homeless guy finds a pair of sunglasses that let him see what the world is really like behind the veil. Now, this was a great idea, based on the idea that we are controlled by aliens, or at least by an alien intelligence that is forcing us to behave in a certain way. The idea of control is a strong one running through science fiction and through many other kinds of genres. But it suffers from declining into action comedy about halfway through. The declining quality is literally apparent while you're watching the film. So it does stand up as a cult classic. It's an interesting film, but watching it is a bit of a struggle. Finally, The Matrix in 1999. Now, this was by the Wachowski brothers, or whatever the hell they call themselves now. This was an intelligent action film based on the idea of a man, Neo, discovering that there's a thing called the Matrix that controls our lives. He doesn't know what it is, and as he slowly discovers what it is, it basically is his entire world, and everything he knows changes.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
This is based on Plato's allegory of the cave. Now, the cave is the idea of several men chained up in a cave, watching shadows on the wall. Behind them is a fire casting shadows, and they're only aware of the existence directly in front of them. So everything that they see is only a reflection of the real world behind them. They've never stepped out of the cave, they've never seen reality of themselves, only this echo of it. And this movie is based on that idea. In the allegory of the cave, one man escapes. He breaks free of his bonds and he steps outside. And it's an agonizing pain. He's never used his eyes before properly, so the light hurts, but gradually he starts to realize that the world is huge and much more beautiful than it was in the cave. But the problem is, he can't free anybody. When he goes back, nobody wants to suffer the pain that he's been through as he freed himself. So they blame him for trying to free them, and they're aggressive towards him for wanting to help. People trapped in the cave don't want to be expanded out of their reality. And this is what the story is about. That's what it's based on. It's an intelligent movie, but unfortunately it suffered from sequelitis, where the next two movies tried to make it into a trilogy and were just garbage. A fourth movie came out recently, it was even worse, and it destroyed it. This was designed as a franchise movie. It was designed to be a technological superhero story, but eventually it descended into corporatism, exactly as RoboCop predicted.
Today, science fiction is in tatters. Epic movies that posed philosophical questions have been replaced by idiots in spandex who can somehow beat villains with godlike powers with a few karate kicks and savage one-liners. Star Wars, the biggest cash cow in the history of the genre, was taken over by a crazy cat lady. Disney took the most profitable movie series in cinematic history and tried turning into a propaganda vehicle. Without the heart and soul of the original, and the slightly war-torn and moderately diseased heart of the prequels, the next trilogy enjoyed all the success of a book designed to make people think. Television series that once explored humanity are gone, and in their place are endless Netflix shows that recycle ideas, race and gender swap characters, and have writing so poor that it makes 50 Shades of Grey look like literature. Star Trek was again taken over by the same propagandizing idiots who not only failed to make a successful political point but also failed to make anything worth pointing your attention at. Where once, science fiction books dominated the aisles in bookstores, now bookstores are dwindling away, to eventually be replaced with endless coffee shops and stores selling mobile devices. The great authors of literary sci-fi died off and were never replaced. The great thinkers and creators of times past were replaced with authors such as J.K. Rowling, who enjoys annoying transgender people on Twitter. Great works of literary fiction that made important points about society, like 1984, are conspicuously absent from the large literary publishers.
It would be easy for me to say that science fiction has declined into apathy and that the current trend is on the downturn. But that's true of all literary genres. Only a small group of investors control all of the media today, whether it be book publishing, whether it be movies, TV shows. It's all controlled by a very small group of people whose primary interest is profits. Quality has been on the back seat for a very long time.
Hello, I like money.
As an example, I often talk about a movie called Fight Club, which isn't a science fiction, although there are elements of it. One of the stars, Brad Pitt, was paid $4 million to appear in this movie. The writer of the original novel that the story was based on was given only $40,000 for the rights to the story. That gives you an idea of how little the people that make movies value the story. With that in mind, is it any surprise that stories have declined in quality on the TV, on our movie screens, and in books? We've lost so many great writers, and they're not being replaced. There is no 1984 out there on the stands. There's no Aldous Huxley writing books. They're no longer encouraged to write them. There's no financial gain from writing. It's almost impossible to become an author. It's even harder to actually make a profit doing it. So we have no fresh blood. All we have is the constant recycling of ideas that worked, i.e. vampire fiction. Because a few of them had a small success, we see more of them. My generation grew up with great science fiction, so we became science fiction fans. The younger generation now is growing up with fantasy because they had Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones. So they're used to fantasy. But even then, there's not any real great fantasy coming out afresh. It's all the same recycled stuff, sequels and reboots constantly. There is no original stuff. And science fiction really suffers from that because Star Wars set the theme and the tone that the movie can be a spectacle just by having special effects in it. It doesn't have to have a story. It doesn't have to have great characters. And unfortunately, that's what's continued today. Movies nowadays, like Marvel, are all about the special effects. They're all about the cinematography, and everything else takes second seat at best.
Yeah, shit! I mean, it's all shit!
You can watch any of the YouTube channels where they analyze movies. Cinema Sins is a great one, where they pull the movie apart, and it's very apparent that the plot doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You have to watch it and focus on the action. If you try and focus on the story, it just disintegrates like a wet tissue. So what's the future of science fiction? Like all genres, it doesn't have one unless we start becoming more demanding as an audience. The way we do that is to stop watching second-rate Marvel movies.
Captain Marvel, Defender of the Cosmos.
Terrible TV shows on Netflix. We need to start upping our game. We need to start being more selective with what we watch, and we need to be more demanding in the way we spend our dollars. When we go to the cinema, we're voting for what the future of movies is. We need to stop going and watching these horrible, crass, cynical marketing ploys and start demanding better, high-quality fiction. Otherwise, the next generation will be even dumber than this one. We will constantly be driven down. One of the best movies for this is Idiocracy, where a man wakes up thousands of years in the future to find that only idiots have bred, and we've interbred and created a horrendously stupid generation where people are no longer capable of doing anything whatsoever. And now a very average man is the smartest man in the world. And we're heading in that direction. There's a scene where a movie is just a butt farting on the screen and everyone laughing. And we're not far off from that now. Nobody reads books. And without the books as a source material, what movies do we have for the future? Again, constant reboots. If we look down my list, The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951, rebooted in 2008. Forbidden Planet so far has survived. Planet of the Apes, there were multiple sequels, which again got increasingly bad. Every one of them was worse than the last. And that was recently rebooted again into a trilogy that's now long gone. Star Wars has been dragged through the mud. Alien, he resurrected that himself. The original director, Ridley Scott, made the Prometheus series, which again were just unwatchable, terrible movies. Star Trek has been taken over by Bad Robot Productions, and the latest versions of it are just unwatchable. Terminator, constant sequels, a TV spin-off, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, which actually wasn't that terrible, but it was a far cry from the quality of the first movies.
Everything's a copy of a copy.
RoboCop was rebooted into a movie that failed miserably. While that hasn't been rebooted into a movie, there are short films that copy the plot exactly. Matrix, 3 sequels to it, each one terrible. But there are lots of movies that very badly rip off The Matrix. All of these have been rebooted, all of these have been sequelized ad infinitum. Same with the books. Brave New World has a movie based on it, a cartoon. 1984 has a movie based on it. iRobot was made into a terrible Will Smith movie that had nothing to do with the book. Fahrenheit 451 had a very good movie, interestingly, that had a different ending to the novel, and the movie ending was actually better. That was turned recently into a Netflix TV show that again failed miserably. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy started as a radio play, became a series of books. He died after writing the 4th book or 5th book in the trilogy. And they continued to try to write books in his name, didn't work. A TV show on the BBC spun off from it, then a movie. The movie didn't really work, and there weren't any sequels, but it's possible that'll be rebooted at some point. It's constant reboots, it's constant replication of the same old material, because there's a chance that we'll watch it out of sheer nostalgia or curiosity. We have to demand better. The future of science fiction totally relies on the audience that consume it. And while our audience doesn't care what they watch and will watch anything on YouTube, we have no choice but to put up with the situation as it is. And I don't want that. Sci-fi writers don't want that. And for the most part, nor does the audience. It's increasingly difficult to find anything out there worth watching. And that's our fault. And it's got to change.